It's Monday, it's 12:15 and we're live in Westminster. Joining me today, Conservative MP Tim Lawton, Labour MP Carolyn Harris, author and journalist Paul Mason, and Headmistress and Chair of the Social Mobility Commission, Catherine Birbalsingh. Today,
look at the protocol and say, why isn't it working? And if need be, we should be acting unilaterally.
Tension, rancour, standoffs, legal challenges, that is the last thing Europe needs right now.
We are serious about getting this protocol sorted out. Because of the harm it is doing, undermining political stability.
The UK, EU and Northern Ireland unionists at loggerheads. The Prime Minister signed the Northern Ireland Protocol. Can he fix it?
Is Boris Johnson an honest man?
I think that talking about personalities is not a helpful thing to do.
Why does the former Health Secretary find questions about Boris Johnson so hard to answer? And Britain's strictest school.
Let's take our seats. Step 1, go. Step 2, go. Step 3, go. 10, 9, who's going to be the speediest? 8, 7, love you.
Is this the way to educate our children? Let's start with this story written up in the Daily Mail following an interview today. Fury as Minister Rachel Maclean says people struggling with the cost of living crisis can work longer hours or get a better paid job to help pay the bills. Do you agree with her, Tim?
It's an unfortunate comment, and I think on reflection she probably would not have said that. I fear there's a bit of a tradition when ministers try to give advice to people struggling, as many people are at the moment, going back to Edwina Currie telling everybody to wear woolly hats. It's probably better not said.
Carolyn, what was your reaction? Rachel Maclean was asking questions about households and how they can protect themselves in this cost of living crisis, and she said the government has already presented quite a big package of measures.
Incredible. I mean, the people in my constituency are working all the hours God sends now, and they still can't afford to look after their family. So, and it gives the Tory party, nice people like Tim, a bad name.
Paul?
Well, let's do the maths. 40-hour week. Inflation's set to hit 10% by the end of this year. Living standards are falling. 40-hour week, 10% of that is another 4 hours. If you're a young parent, a young mum, working those 40 hours, or you're already struggling to get your children to and from school, where do the other 4 hours come from? And I think that this MP has actually put her finger on the problem, that we are now hitting the limits of what people can do in this regard. Get a better job, fine. There's a shortage of skilled engineers. How is that mum waiting for the yellow bit label, sort of out-of-date produce at the end of the Tesco aisle? How does she become a skilled engineer? All these structural problems of the British economy are not solved, and people are really... I mean, the word social emergency was used yesterday, and I think it's right.
Catherine?
Yeah, well, I think that exactly. The thing is that in our society there are always going to be a variety of jobs, and some of those jobs aren't going to pay very much. And what the government needs to look at is those jobs that are paying very little. People need to do those, and is it possible to live off the money that you can bring in on them? And if not, then it's something the government needs to look at. All
right. Well, I think Rachel Maclean may be regretting those comments on the basis of what the panel has said. Let's talk about Northern Ireland and the political situation there. Boris Johnson has been writing in this morning's Belfast Telegraph. Let's take a look at the headline. Let's change the protocol, not scrap it, says Johnson ahead of Northern Ireland visit. He says in this article that he wants to reform the Northern Ireland Protocol, that key part of his Brexit deal. And, as it says, he's also travelling to Northern Ireland to meet the parties because he wants to see power sharing resume. Let's talk to our correspondent, Charlotte Gallagher. She's at Hillsborough in County Down. Hello to you, Charlotte. What's the Prime Minister trying to achieve?
Well, he's trying to get Stormont back to work, essentially, Jo. It was meant to be back to business on Friday after the election, but then we had this deadlock, essentially, when the DUP said, we're not going to enter into the power sharing executive, and we're also not going to vote for the Assembly Speaker until significant changes are made to the Northern Ireland Protocol or it's scrapped altogether. But the problem is Sinn Féin. they agree with the protocol. They want to keep the protocol. So today, Boris Johnson has to try and keep both sides happy, come to some kind of compromise. I think we saw in his article in the Belfast Telegraph, he used a lot more softer language about the protocol. It wasn't so much sabre rattling as we'd heard previously about ripping the whole thing up and starting again, essentially. So that's maybe a sign, something positive. And also Sir Geoffrey Donaldson, he spoke to the BBC earlier, the leader of the DUP, and he said he could live with it if the protocol was changed. It didn't necessarily have to be thrown away. But the thing is, for people in Northern Ireland, they only voted for these people a few weeks ago, and they thought they'd be tackling the cost of living, education, healthcare, and so far Stormont isn't functioning. It's a parliament on paper only.
You say there that Geoffrey Donaldson, the leader of the DUP, said he could live with it, live with changes. Can you expand a little bit more on what the DUP want to see from Boris Johnson?
They essentially want something to be done about this border in the sea, essentially. They don't want to feel that they are being separated by the rest of the UK and goods having to come into Northern Ireland and be checked at ports before they can move on. They essentially want to see that scrapped or significantly altered. And we saw in Boris Johnson's article, he said things like supermarket lorries delivering to Tesco's and Sainsbury's in Northern Ireland shouldn't be treated the same as big tanker ships coming over from Shanghai or the Netherlands. So that could be something that is changed, and that's certainly something that the DUP want to see changed. However, you've also got to think about the wider situation, and Ireland in particular. They've said any unilateral changes to this agreement is reckless, it could risk political instability. They've even said it could threaten the peace process. And they've said, what kind of message does it send to the rest of the world that the UK doesn't respect international law? So really, at the moment, we just don't know what's going to happen. But the DUP at the moment is saying they cannot live with the situation as it is, and they are refusing to work.
And what about Sinn Féin's reaction? They topped the poll in the recent elections to Stormont. What's their response to the visit from Boris Johnson?
I think Michelle O'Neill, who's the Sinn Féin Vice President and also will be the incoming First Minister, will have some very strong words for Boris Johnson. That party is pro-protocol, they don't want to see it scrapped, and I imagine there will be some very testy conversations in the building behind me when Boris Johnson comes. I mean, after all, he did sign this agreement. It's okay saying now that you don't agree with it, but he did sign the protocol, so he essentially knew what was going to happen. So I think Sinn Féin are really going to push back on any idea that significant changes will be made to the protocol. And we've actually seen Michelle O'Neill this morning before the meeting with Boris Johnson. She's been down in Dublin meeting the Taoiseach and getting his support. So that's obviously a real statement to Boris Johnson saying, look, I've already had discussions with Ireland and the rest of the EU. We have to stick with this.
Charlotte Gallagher, thank you very much. Well, there's the reaction from Sinn Féin and the DUP, certainly. Tim, do you think that he has seen Boris Johnson as an honest broker in Northern Ireland by all sides?
Who's seen as an honest broker?
Boris Johnson.
By whom?
By all of the parties, all sides.
Well, he needs to be. I mean, this is a problem that's got to be sorted. It's a unique position in Northern Ireland, and the protocol is not working. The protocol in itself is not necessarily the problem. It's the way it's being enforced and policed. It is a crazy situation where something like 20% of all the inspections going on between EU countries and outside countries are happening on that small border with a few 100,000 people in the population on Northern Ireland. That should not be happening, and it's that sort of thing which is undermining the working of the protocol.
Well, you say it's not working. Of course, some parts of the political spectrum there at the community think it is working, including Sinn Féin.
Well, if some people think it's working, largely they have an agenda towards a reunification of the island of Ireland. That's Sinn Féin primarily. No other country within the EU would accept a situation where you have to have goods checked between one city and another city in the same country, where you have differential tax rates imposed on you between different parts of that country. That was never the intention. There should be light touch inspection to comply with this unique situation that we have a border with the EU and we have the Good Friday Agreement that can't make it a hard border. And we should have a recognition that Northern Ireland is part of the United Kingdom. It should be treated no differently as the border between England and Scotland. And that's what the EU has effectively reneged on.
Carolyn?
I think Boris Johnson's got to take responsibility for this. His deal, he signed it, he knew what he was doing. The people of Northern Ireland are once again without a government. They really need the stability with the cost of living crisis and everything else, and compromises have to be made. And I would say let's start with the veterinary agreement process and try to get that through. It's a place to start from, and then we negotiate up.
And that would be an agreement that would actually bring the whole of the UK into closer alignment, certainly on goods with the EU. Everyone talks about what Boris Johnson knew when he signed up to this treaty and whether he was the only person who didn't realise that there would probably have to be a border then effectively down the Irish Sea. Do you think the article that he's written today, though, shows the sort of initiative that might actually bring power sharing back?
I welcome the fact that it's a restrained and sort of that the words are restrained. But I think what the government's trying to do here is in breach of one of the principles of the Good Friday Agreement, because the Good Friday Agreement says there must be parity and equality of esteem between the two communities. The Unionists have thrown their toes out of the pram because they've lost the election. The government already didn't like the protocol, but now it has an excuse for not just scrapping it. I mean, they're scrapping the treaty. They're scrapping unilaterally a piece of international law. And if Boris Johnson were treating the anti-unionist community with parity of esteem, he would not be privileging the DUP's reaction to this situation. That's where I think he's going to go wrong, and he's going to get walloped by Washington and by Brussels. We, the UK, cannot breach international law without consequences.
Tim?
Economically, the protocol is not working for the whole of Northern Ireland, whether you're on the Sinn Féin side or the Ulster-Unionist side. It is not helping the economy. Politically, it's certainly helping those who want to have a reunification of the island of Ireland. So to say that it's in some way giving preference to one part of the community is nonsense. This is not working for all of the people of Northern Ireland. All the time we don't have an assembly not there working to help people in Northern Ireland with the cost of living crisis that we have in the rest of the United Kingdom. It is not working. So it's the politics of this that need to be put on one side, while we can sort out the logistics and the economics, the finances, and have a sensible compromise, which is what that protocol should have been about in the first place.
Paul?
The Republic of Ireland's economy, since the global financial crisis, has grown by 55%. Northern Ireland's economy has shrunk in the same period by 2.5%. Northern Ireland's economic future is very, very clear, even into the unionist community and the many secular people who are in neither community. We've got to help the people of Northern Ireland get over the problem that Britain signed away their right to be part of the full United Kingdom. We didn't do it. The Labour didn't. I'm sorry, that is what the Brexit deal did. Boris Johnson and Lord Frost, very clear, the border economically is in the Irish Sea. And you've got to live with that. We didn't negotiate it. You did.
And Northern Ireland remains an equal part of the United Kingdom.
Until there is a referendum.
That does not require having the same level of detailed checks on tankers coming into the EU from China, as has been given the example, as those going from Scotland across to Northern Ireland. We are the same country. This is all about politics. It's politics of the EU, I'm afraid, who've not forgiven us for coming out of the EU.
What do you say to that, Carolyn, that it is the politics of the EU, or the intransigence, as it has been described by Kwasi Kwarteng, of the EU over the arrangement and the implementation of what we call the Northern Ireland Protocol with checks in the Irish Sea?
Well, I think the EU have actually compromised. They compromised around the NHS drugs for Northern Ireland. So there is a deal to be done, but it's up to Liz Truss and the Prime Minister to get this deal done. It's the people of Northern Ireland who are losing out at the moment. You know, this political infighting is not a good look for anyone. They need to get the Assembly running, and they need to get a deal that makes that possible.
I mean, watching this from the outside to a certain extent, Catherine, as an observer, where do you stand now looking at what Boris Johnson is trying to do, which is to get all the parties, and the DUP particularly, back into power sharing so that there is government in Northern Ireland, and yet having to some extent to live with the deal that he signed in 2019 when he said there would be no checks and the deal was compatible with that Good Friday Agreement?
Yeah, well, it's a difficult situation, and I'm no expert. In fact, listening to this conversation, I'm learning lots. So, but I care about the people of Northern Ireland, and I care about cost of living and the difficulties that normal people are going through. And if borders and bureaucracy and inspections are preventing them from being able to live their lives, then I think the government needs to do something. And I suppose he's doing something. I don't know whether or not that's the right thing.
Well, picking up then on borders and bureaucracy, the words you used, the Northern Ireland Minister, Conor Burns, was in Washington last week talking to politicians there, trying to bring them to some extent on side. We spoke to him from there and he was referring to the levels of bureaucracy. Let's take a look.
But essentially what we need to do is get to the point where you don't have to fill in all of this to move goods within your country that are destined for sale and consumption in your company.
Is it necessary to have that level of paperwork and checks in the way that Conor Burns has set out when there are goods that are destined for Northern Ireland and not necessarily for the EU? They can still protect the integrity of the single market.
I don't know. I trade as a business person with Europe, and it is after Brexit it is quite difficult. I have a sheaf of paper that I have to use when I even go and perform a speech in the EU. So thanks very much for that to Boris Johnson and the people who voted for Brexit.
Right, and he said there'd be no checks, Tim, at the time, and that the deal was fully compatible with the Good Friday Agreement. What were you expecting?
There were always going to be some form of light checks, monitoring, call it what you like. But, I mean, Paul's just wrong. Why on earth should a drugs company in Worthing, in my constituency, or an engineer who's sending its pills and its widgets to Edinburgh have to have any different requirements than if it's sending them to Belfast? We are the same country. We have the same standards. If they are meant for Northern Ireland and not to go into the EU, this sort of paperwork is complete and utter nonsense. It shouldn't happen. The EU knows it doesn't need to happen. It's no more dangerous sending a pill from Worthing to Belfast than it is from Worthing to Edinburgh. So this is unnecessary, and we are one nation. And I'm afraid just having the EU trying to make out that Northern Ireland is not one nation. We are four nations within one country. And I'm afraid the EU has got to realise that. They would not tolerate this sort of behaviour between, say, Catalonia and Madrid within Spain if they had to go through all these sorts of regulations. They shouldn't expect us to either.
Well, let's see if there is the political will and trust in existence. Let's have a look at this in the Sunday Times. Liz Truss, the Foreign Secretary, was sent to stop a trade war. Now Number 10 fears she could start one. Is she playing politics, Tim, with this?
No, nobody wants a trade war. We just want a sensible, pragmatic agreement so Northern Ireland can get on with its life as part of the United Kingdom, and we can have the Assembly restored, and the EU can acknowledge, as they always said, that actually we don't need to have all this ridiculous...
So is this about leadership, do you think?
Bureaucracy. You'll have to ask her whether she's on manoeuvres or not. She's got a job to do, and she's responsible for Northern Ireland agreements.
Yeah, but is that...
She's going to be busy on that.
Well, is that how it looks, then? Even if we... she's not here to answer that specific question. Is that how it looks? Playing politics with this issue?
No. This is about trying to find a solution. Why is everything got to be down to who's going to be standing for leadership or trying to play party politics? There is a serious problem in Northern Ireland at the moment. We've got to have the Assembly restored. We've got to have a sensible arrangement, which is what we thought we did have in the agreement with the rest of the EU. The EU know that can happen. It's all politics, so for goodness sake, let's sit round the table and get on with coming up with a solution.
Well, you say, why does it always have to be about leadership? Let's have a look at the former Foreign Secretary speaking to Sophie Rayworth on BBC's Sunday Morning programme yesterday.
I have said many times that I don't rule out a return to frontline politics myself, but I don't think now is the right moment.
Is Boris Johnson the best person for the job, or is there a better person who could do it?
Well, I hope he can turn things round, because, as I say, I don't think this is the moment for a leadership contest. I think we do need to back the Prime Minister in the situation we're in now.
Into the next election, is he the best person to lead the party into the next election?
I very much hope so.
You hope so. Is Boris Johnson an honest man?
I think that talking about personalities is not a helpful thing to do.
Why was it so hard for him to answer that, do you think, Tim?
Why are you asking me? let me just make
because
it very
lucky
clear.
Old you. You're the Conservative MP on the panel. You may have to vote in a leadership election
Let me
at some
make
point.
it absolutely clear now. I have no intention whatsoever to be putting my name forward for a leadership bid in the Conservative Party, if indeed that happens in the
But would you like the look of
future.
Jeremy Hunt if he put his forward?
Well, he's perfectly entitled to. I didn't vote for him last time, so I'm not sure why I would change my mind this time. But Look, there is no leadership contest going on at the moment. I'm the wrong person to ask. I have been on the losing campaign team of every candidate since William Hague, so nobody will want my help anyway.
No, I was going to say, well, you're not going to get a job anytime soon, are you? All right, well, it's not just in the Conservative Party that there is talk about leadership. Let's have a look at this in The Guardian. Labour heavyweight Wes Streeting denies plan to succeed Keir Starmer. Reports Wes Streeting hosted a fundraising dinner in March, possibly with an eye on a future leadership contest. Carolyn, would you make a good candidate?
There's no vacancy.
You should do it.
Oh, gosh, yes. No, like you, I don't want to be in that position, but I would vote for you, by the way, Tim.
Thank you very much.
Well, there you go.
I'd vote for you too.
No, I mean, no, I think this is naughtiness, isn't it? This is people digging around and coming up with events and whatever. I don't think Wes is going for it. If he is going for it, well, there's no vacancy.
Would he be good?
I don't know. I mean, I honestly don't know. I mean, Keir Starmer is the leader of the Labour Party. That's who we need to lead us, and that's who I'm sticking with.
Well, they're being very coy, of course, both Tim and Carolyn, because actually there is the prospect, potentially, of leadership contests over what happens with the outcome of the investigations into Partygate on either side. So what do you make of the discussion, Wes Street?
Partygate on one side, Beergate on the other.
Yes.
Yeah, OK, so I think it is a bit dysfunctional for the Conservatives to be having this proxy leadership debate, and it's about real things. I think insofar as the levelling up agenda is real and honest, I think the obstacle to it is Rishi Sunak and his attitude towards austerity. I think Johnson should be thinking about reshuffling him if he wants to achieve what he wants to achieve, and that necessarily creates a tension. Liz Truss called last week for a global NATO, while we're trying to get Sweden and Finland into NATO, not as a global alliance of sort of supermen. So there are dysfunctions.
On the Labour side?
On the Labour side, I think people should be allowed to say, look, one day I'd like to become leader. Our party, like the Tories, is an alliance of different philosophies, and people should be allowed to set out their stalls.
And what do you make of Wes Streeting as a potential candidate?
I wouldn't agree with him. If there was a leadership and there won't be, because I don't think Keir Starmer is going to be found guilty, but if there was a leadership contest, I certainly wouldn't vote for him. I'd like to see a left-wing or sort of centre left-wing leader of the Labour Party, and he isn't it.
Is this all a distraction, talk about leadership and future leaders, or a necessary part of politics, Catherine?
Well, it is necessary, I suppose, but I don't really care who leads. What's important, I care that the person who's in charge says the right things when it comes to education, when it comes to social mobility, and really takes charge of the country for the little people. And it doesn't really matter who does it. I mean, frankly, if it's Conservatives, if it's Labour, if it's Keir Starmer, if it's Boris Johnson, I don't care. I just want them saying the right things.
And what do you think about the current leadership on both sides?
Well, the Partygate thing, I sort of wish we could get past it in a way. I just feel there's so many more important things to be talking about. We've mentioned the cost of living. Education, of course, I think is the most important thing, because it's about making sure that our children are taught properly and are given the kinds of skills so that when there's a recession, they need to be well equipped to be able to get through that recession. And while the government rightly needs to be looking at the short term, I'm looking at more the long term. And I want a leader who will take us forward into the long term so that my kids have a better chance.
Let's stick with the short term just for the moment. Well, here. Let's have a look at this story in BBC News. Wakefield Labour candidate chosen after committee walks out. This is reporting that Labour's selection of a candidate for the upcoming by-election in Wakefield has caused a row inside the local party. The executive committee that runs the local Labour Party walked out at the final selection meeting. The committee resigned after objecting to the way the final two candidates have been shortlisted. You can see a photo here from the Wakefield Labour Party. This is indeed the outgoing executive committee. You can see they're holding up a sign that says defending democracy. What's going on here, Carolyn?
Well, from my understanding, there was a small number of people who walked out to the meeting, but when you're involved in politics and you're involved in selection processes, you will always have people who don't like who the potential candidates are. They won't like the eventual candidate, and in order to make their case, they perform stunts like this. The guy that we've chosen, Simon, he has a long history with Wakefield. He'll be an excellent candidate. At this moment in time, we've got no representation from anyone in Wakefield. It's really important that we get a candidate elected into the House of Commons to make sure Wakefield's voice is heard.
It's a stunt.
Look, all selections, these kind of selections, are always brutal. Yeah. I've been in one, and they're brutal. But they are... I think the people there have got a point, because... there is a kind of knee-jerk reaction, I think, at the centre of the Labour Party at the moment that is so risk-averse that it is who's on the receiving end of the kind of risk aversion is almost always left-wing candidates. So this happened again and again. We're finding left-wing candidates disenfranchised, councillors decounseled, just before elections. And I think both me and you, Caroline, did campaign and vote for Keir Starmer. And I would just say it is becoming a little bit dysfunctional for there to be this vendetta war on the left by Labour HQ and parts of the people, the team or the front bench team. I just say, look, do you want headlines like that? I don't. I'd like to be saying, let's get to Wakefield tomorrow and campaign for a very good candidate, but the way they've been chosen just doesn't look very good, does it?
Dysfunctional? A vendetta war against the left?
No, I don't agree with that. I think it's... I think maybe there was a time when the left had a little bit more say during the former leadership, and maybe now there's a bit more central left politics coming into play. But it's what? I mean, we have to be a party that appeals to the people who vote for us, not the membership. We need to realise that people out there need a Labour government, and to do that, we need the candidates who can actually fit that bill.
I mean, is there a sense of swinging one way and the other, and to be electable, it's better to be central, as Carolyn says?
In a high-profile by-election, I'd just quite happily hand the whole thing over to central office, the Labour HQ. But that's not what the rules say. The rules say, it's all in the long listing. I know to my husband, I've done this. It's in the long listing, and if you're going to break the rules, just break them and do them and explain it. But this is clearly members there, and it will affect people's enthusiasm to go out, I think, and campaign, which is unfortunate.
All right. I mean, do you think there is a little bit too much control freakery in our politics, Catherine, that people should be more confident about allowing local people to decide?
Yes, and I also wonder about the system of getting into these positions. I mean, this is just what I hear people say, but it's just so difficult. I mean, Paul just referred to that. And I think that sometimes maverick candidates who are a little bit different, it's quite difficult, I think, for them to make it into politics. And it does mean nowadays that the people in politics can kind of just have always been politicians. And I wish we could go back to the old days where people had different kinds of jobs and then they got into politics, because then they're more representative of the people, I think.
Would you throw your hat into the ring ever?
Never.
Okay.
Never.
Oh, well.
Not for me.
Caroline, you were saying you made it.
What I would say is, I'm a member of the Labour Party. I've always been a member of the Labour Party, and I'm a 60-year-old woman with pink hair who was a dinner lady and a barmaid.
Yes.
But I'm a Labour MP, and I think the Labour Party's given me that platform, and I'm very proud that they did, and I'm very proud to represent my constituency.
I mean, just finally, you say that they should perhaps release some control from the centre. Do you think that shows a lack of confidence, and that if there was more confidence and they were even, more successful in electoral terms, that they wouldn't do this?
The Labour Party specifically is an alliance of different people. It's very heavily based in the trade unions, very heavily based in certain parts of the country. What the leadership needs to be doing to avoid stuff like this is getting the candidates it would like in through persuasion and negotiation. And I think that's traditionally in most elections how it's done. Actually, in reality, it's not down to who turns up to the selection meeting. It's very often a negotiation between unions and different factions of the party. You just need to get on with doing that in the normal, plain old, smoke-filled room and curly sandwiches.
You like that, did you, Paul?
It's how politics gets done.
Let's talk about something completely different. I'll show you this headline in The Spectator, the March of the Menosplainers. Now, the menopause has been talked an awful lot over the last few months, including about a national shortage of hormone replacement therapy, been making the news, and a number of celebrities coming forward to share their experiences of living with the symptoms. But some people feel it's been overkill. Let's talk to the writer Michelle Kirsch, who penned this article with that title. Explain what you mean, Michelle, by menosplainers.
Hi, thank you very much for having me on. I think there's a really fine line between being understanding and being condescending and having a general conversation involving men who don't go through the menopause, as far as I know, and trying to help women who are going through this process and maybe suffering or maybe not. There's another narrative. A lot of women suffer greatly. Some women don't suffer very much at all, and we don't need to have just the one narrative.
Right. I mean, you've campaigned a lot on this issue, Carolyn. What's your initial response to what you've heard from Michelle?
I'm disappointed to hear Michelle say that, because if only we'd reached peak menopause. If we'd reached that stage, we'd have every woman in this country who was able to access the support and the resources to actually help her through it. And for every woman who says she's sailed through this, a conversation with somebody who has gone through it and explained some of the symptoms she believes were not the menopause, she may well realise that she was menopausal. What we are trying to do is to make sure that everybody in this country and across the world understands just how debilitating the menopause is. And if that means shouting about it from rooftops, so we will. We can't have women not being able to have normal lives because they're unaware of what's wrong with them. Women who think they've got early onset dementia. Women whose relationships are breaking up. They're giving up work. They're reducing hours. Women who are taking their own life because they don't know what the menopause is. There will never be enough menopause talk until every woman has got some justice.
Michelle?
Thank you very much. Yeah, I'm still not convinced that men should be part of this conversation. It's a natural biological thing that happens to women. And in my mum's day, my late mum's day, it was a conversation that was had kind of sneakily and kind of with a bit of a sense of humour between woman to woman, and we had a bit of a laugh about it. I realise it can be a very serious issue, but in a way, by bringing it out so much into the forefront of the political game, in a way, we're kind of hoisting ourselves by our own petard, and that we're, by saying like we're hormonal, we've got these issues, that's giving men another reason not to hire us.
Carolyn? Absolute nonsense. Men ask me the best questions because men want to help the women in their lives. They want to help the women in the workforce. And any woman who's listening to this would be absolutely insulted that you don't believe that men should be part of this conversation. To say it's archaic is unbelievable. My mother didn't talk to me about the menopause, and that meant I ended up 12 years on antidepressants, thinking I'd had a nervous breakdown. If people don't talk about it, we never change that.
Well, let's ask one of the men on the panel for his response. Has there been too much focus in the media on this?
Absolutely not. And talking about being hoisted by your own petard, I'm afraid what we've just heard is absolutely the reason why we need to have as much publicity about this as possible. And I'm completely with Carolyn on this, which is why I was really pleased to support her bill. And she's done a huge service, not just to women, by bringing this out of the shadows. It might have been a taboo subject. It absolutely needs to be talked about on a mainstream political programme in Parliament, in people's living rooms, and it absolutely affects men as well. This is men and families are affected by how their wives and partners and relations are going through the menopause. To say this is something that was just all sneakily spoken about behind closed doors, we've left that behind, thank goodness, and we need more of this, and we need more subjects like this brought out of the shadows, because it's affecting a lot of people, and just pushing it into the background helps nobody.
Catherine?
Yeah, well, thank goodness for Carolyn, actually. I mean, it's the sort of thing that I am a bit embarrassed to talk about, and that's because, as we discussed, it's something that wasn't always discussed in the shadows or not discussed at all. And so it's precisely then that people who are brave can go out there and make these things well known, because well, it's helpful for the rest of us, really, who aren't brave enough to do that.
I mean, one of the things that Michelle writes, Paul, is if we present every normal biological event as a pathology, we're giving the guys exactly the ammo they need. Poor, disabled, hysterical women. No wonder they can't think straight. This can't be good.
The word pathology, another word would be medicalisation. But the problem is, if we've now got an HRT shortage and we're having to scramble to get the pills over the channel, that is both a logistical and a medical problem. I think that what the writer here is objecting to is something that has happened during our lifetimes, which is that when we were growing up, we didn't talk about mental health. ADHD was not a diagnosis, for example, and the menopause was just something most men of my age wouldn't have known what its symptoms were when we were growing up, because our mothers didn't even talk about it. So we've seen these issues brought out into the open, but also, yes, to an extent medicalised, because then you have, in a political system, you have a National Health Service that gives you the right to be treated for it. And we're still not there with menopause, we're not there with mental health, we're not there with numerous numerous things that were not even classified as problems when we were growing up.
Michelle, what's your reaction to what the panel have said?
I feel at the point about mental health and other issues that are discussed widely, are really important, and it's important to have that as a discussion, things that affect men and women both. Things that, I used to be a health journalist. We had awareness weeks pretty much every week about some particular condition or another. It gets a lot of hoo-ha, a lot of publicity for that week that it's in the news, and then it kind of dies down. I do hope, I'm not against women discussing this openly, I do hope that women who are suffering terribly from the menopause do get the medication that they need. I hope that they can have honest discussions with their partners, but I think to have a general discussion and to have every Sally, Jane and whatever, have a general discussion, a women's discussion, and write a book about this is perhaps not a good thing, because it is giving men a reason to say, like, oh, crikey, she's in her 50s, she's probably going to be going through the change, she's not going to be that reliable. That's going to work against us.
Well, Michelle, thank you. You don't have any support for that particular strand of your work here from the panel, and possibly from or beyond. But thank you very much for joining us. Let's talk about education. Catherine, the cameras have been in your school making a documentary. Let's take a look.
3, 2, 2. So that's the ratio of 3 to 2. When the teacher's speaking, everybody's quiet. Everybody's listening to the teacher.
The classes are really, really quiet. There's no chatting about. We do talk to our partners, but only when the teacher tells us to.
Let's take our seats. Step 1, go. Step 2, go. Step 3, go. 10, 9. Who's going to be the speediest? 8, 7. Lovely Sahara. 6, 5, 4. Put your chest all the way in. 3, 2, and 1.
Detractors think that we are North Korea, that the children are deeply unhappy, that we are cruel to the children, and they've never even visited.
Right, stand here, name and form nice and loud.
I had detention for not having my second pencil.
I made a silly face in the corridor to my friend, and I didn't see a teacher, but there was a teacher. And then, yeah, I got a detention for that.
This is at the Michaela School. What do you think you're getting right, Catherine, and where others have failed?
Well, I think people underestimate just how chaotic some schools can be. And people imagine that I'm walking up and down with whips and chains and I'm the strictest headmistress and all of this. But actually, it's just about clarity. And the children can make a choice and they have agency. And the children are very happy and they love it. I mean, it is funny because, of course, when documentary makers come into your school, they're looking for the most strict things, all that step 1, step 2 business. I've actually never seen a class happen like that. So they found that particular class and then went and filmed that. So, the documentary in that sense slightly exaggerates things. Having said that, we are strict. And what that means is we love them. You want to immerse them in love. There are all kinds of rules that I talk about how to raise children. And it's not just for teachers. This is also for parents. One of the guys who does our electrics came and watched the film, and he said he learned how to be a better father in watching the film. So there's lots for everyone. And it's just that in 2022, children need order and clarity. And we need to believe that children have agency to then make the right choices about what they do. If I do this, I'll get a detention. If I do that, I get a merit. And they make that choice.
Right. Do you think that's a template that could work in every school, Paul?
I hope not. I'm glad this school exists. I'm a big supporter of diversity in education. But my 13-year-old self would have run away from your school, I'm afraid. Because we need to. There are many other ways, aren't there, of achieving what you are absolutely rightly identify, which is that behaviour and noise. Well, I'm a qualified teacher. I was a teacher. Behaviour and noise are real obstacles, as is, of course, the external environment to the school, the gang culture, the poverty, etc. If this is a way of counteracting it, I think it should be tried. We should celebrate the achievement of the children because they're achieving very high exam results. But There are good comprehensives that achieve good behaviour and good outcomes. So let's not fetishise one way of doing it, is all I would say.
Well, I would say that all of those good schools are really great on the behaviour, and they have structure and they have consistency. The key thing is to have consistency across your classrooms where the teachers are delivering something that's similar, and to have high expectations of all children. And rather than think to yourself, well, this child comes from a poor background, so I'll let the homework go in this instance, or this child lives on an estate, or his father isn't there, therefore I'm not going to expect the same standards for him, that's wrong. Because in the end, you feel compassionate in the moment, but in the end, that child doesn't learn how to read, doesn't learn to be numerate and so on, and they pay the price later on in life.
Right. Do you not need to take any account in terms of children's backgrounds, what's going on at home or outside school, when you are dealing with what you say, the clarity and discipline that you think is required?
Yeah, so in exceptional circumstances, at my school, for instance, if we ever veer away from the rules, it's always me that makes that decision, and only me. So the ordinary teachers wouldn't be able to do that, although it's funny because I see my teacher there going step 1, step 2, and I think, oh, that's not normally how we get the kids to sit down. So obviously there is some inconsistency, but consistency is good for children. They thrive in it. And that's when they can be creative. That's when they can put forward their own points of view because they're safe and secure and loved.
Do you think it's a template that could work everywhere?
No. I mean, well done, you've done a brilliant job, but I'm thinking about the schools in my constituency where there are so many social and economic problems, and there's everything that's going around them, like you said, missing dads, and they wouldn't have the wherewithal to meet the exacting standards in terms of the financial cost, uniform, for example, the equipment they would need. They just couldn't do it. Some of my schools are doing more social work than they are actual education, and that's the truth of it. And I worry that, I mean, I went to a school not dissimilar to that. It was a grammar school, and we had to stand up and the teachers wore gowns, and it did me well, but there was a lot of girls who did rebel against that, and it didn't work out well for them. So I think there needs to be a balance here.
How can you persuade Karen, if you opened a school in her constituency, that it would work?
Well, I would say that we're in the inner city and we have similar sorts of children. It's less about cost. It's more about keeping your standards high and giving the same education to the poor as you would do the rich. But when you think to yourself, well, they're poor, so they can't do it, that's where we let children down. And it's by keeping those standards high that they then rise to them so that they're able to leave school not just with brilliant GCSE results, but they're able to have the habits of success that will ensure that they have resilience and discipline in themselves, self-discipline, that they're ambitious, that they're able to build the kinds of skills and take the kind of knowledge that will see them through the rest of their lives. If we are so-called compassionate in that moment, because it makes us feel better, because we feel good about ourselves by lowering our standards, it doesn't help those children in the end.
Tim?
I think what Catherine is doing is brilliant. There are other schools who had similar approaches. There are many, many more schools whose kids could benefit from this sort of approach. And I think the real problem that Catherine has absolutely identified is this poverty of aspiration for too many of our kids. I've seen it in my own constituency, where you have schools who the head will say to me, well, the trouble is, you know, the kids from around here, they're never really going to do very well. And you've got another school, the other end of my constituency, with the same sort of demographics, doing brilliantly. So it starts with leadership. It starts with having real aspiration for your kids and wanting your kids to do well, giving them that order and clarity and making them resilient. I think Catherine's onto something here. The results are showing it, but it's a very popular school. Lots of parents want their kids to get into it. And I just want to see more of this approach around the country. It won't fit absolutely everybody, but there's a lot more kids who could benefit from it. So all power to Catherine.
And can I just ask you quickly? Yeah, well, you say you rail against progressives. I think that was one of the parts of it. Who are they?
So the people who have, I'd say, too low standards, and also who don't. They argue against the teacher or the parent being in a position of authority, and that it's the children who should be leading rather than the adult. And I think the adult is the one who should be taking charge and the children following us.
And you're opening another school next year, but that is all we have time for today. Thank you to all of my guests for the programme. I will be back tomorrow, of course, with more Politics Live at 12:15. Please join me then. From all of us here, bye-bye.